This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. In this week's episode, I'm chatting to nurseryman and designer Ben Preston of Cliffbank Nursery. We have a conversation about the realities of running a small, sustainable nursery and get into everything from growing in sand and selling bare root plants to why local nurseries matter more than ever and why this industry really is a labour of love.
So obviously I'm at Cliffbank Nursery. It's a little retail plant nursery up in Yorkshire. We're about 10 minutes from Harrogate and 15 minutes from Leeds, which is quite nice because obviously I was at Yorkgate Garden before. So we're quite near there and we're quite near Harlow Car. So we're sandwiched between Harlow Car and Yorkgate. So it's nice people are making day trips and doing all three or going to one of the gardens and coming here after. So I'm a gardener come nurseryman. Trained at Audley End in Essex. That was my first real meaty job, which was as a heebie-jeebie, the Historic and Botanic Garden Bursary Scheme, which I had a great time. It was my placement year at university. I did horticulture and plant science at Nottingham Trent, and I had a sort of a year out in the third year to go in placement year, and that opened loads of doors to. I was really inspired by Alan North, who was the head gardener there and wanted to become a head gardener then. I spent a little bit of time down at Dixter, which was obviously, that was really when it blew my mind about the wonders of ornamental planting. I was working in the walled kitchen garden at Audley End. And it all sort of spiralled really, and went away to New Zealand and took some time out, did some cycle touring, but I ended up coming back and working in Yorkshire. And the job at Yorkgate popped up, which was... But it's a while ago now, it's probably about 12 years ago. And I was there for 5 years. So Yorkgate's really where I cut my teeth and was a little bit in the deep end. Applied for the senior gardener job. When I got there, I ended up being the only one there and quickly became the head gardener and learnt on the job really, which was a real baptism of fire, but a really good one. And learning how to work with people as much as plants. I really think that was the most important thing. And I mean, I love people. I love working with people. So that was like my main skill set. Rather than the garden, it was my people skills really, and then just fitted around it and learned on the job and really, really enjoyed the propagation side of it. We grew lots of things for the garden and we sort of recrafted we added more to the garden. We added a new little nursery and a cafe and new garden rooms and really, really loved the nursery side of it. And then quite out of the blue, Cliffbank came up for rent, farm business tenancy, and you had to submit a business plan for it. And a friend of mine who's a retired butcher, he said, we're off to see this derelict nursery tomorrow. And I said, what do you mean? I was very happy at Yorkgate. Quite a comfortable, had a nice little flat with the job and really loved it. Lovely team and loads of volunteers. Anyway, I walked through the gates the next day and completely fell in love with it and went home. And it was in sort of early days of COVID and went home and I actually tested positive the next day for COVID and was locked away for 10 days and wrote a business plan. And 6 weeks later, we'd signed the contract for the nursery. So it was all a bit of a whirlwind, really. And not looked back. And I think it's really lovely being a head gardener, looking after a garden, but you're only ever the keeper of the keys, I suppose. And I wanted to put my own mark on somewhere and make all my own mistakes and work out how to do things. I think, and that's probably one of the biggest takeaways from the last 4 years. So we moved into the nursery 4 years ago on the 17th of March. We're just coming up to being 4 years here on site. And it was completely derelict when we moved in. And yeah, we've just done it piecemeal. We've done it on a bit of a shoestring. We buy some bare root stuff in. We probably get a lot from seed and cuttings. But the plan is in the next couple of years to get away so that we're completely self-sufficient in producing plants. Obviously, to start with, you've got to build up plant stock and things, and we've actually got a Rhinebeck order coming next week from Holland, which is an amazing resource of field-grown bare root plants. And Rhinebeck's put together an amazing list. So each year, these last 3 years, we've got a small order in the spring, and that's got smaller each year because we grow more and more of our own, and it's about getting the stock in the ground. And we've got stock beds. We've got stock beds actually in the nursery, which are in sand, which is for a number of reasons, which we'll come on to. And then I have a small plot of land in the village, which was another amazing thing. Somebody came in and said, we've had a cut flower grower growing in on our land for a number of years and they're retiring. So we want somebody to sort of tend it. Are you interested? And I was like, yeah, that'd be amazing because we've got a horrendous horsetail problem on the nursery. So we've got horsetail and bindweed, and which actually are completely fine if you're gardening with it. But when you're lifting plants from the ground to sell, you can't be selling horsetail and pernicious weed. So we've got a little plot that's about an acre down in the village, which is all sort of quite, rectangular beds. It's quite formal, quite easy to look after, and we might just have to mow the paths. So I'm kind of working with building that, and we're getting that somewhere near now. We're weeding it and getting it back to a working state. And then I've got the sand beds on the nursery. So yeah, it's working out how best to be able to produce all the plants without buying anything at all, and really sticking true to my real values.
When you were doing the business plan, did you factor in things like, I want to be low input, I want to grow sustainably? We just had a little chat before we started recording, and you mentioned that, yes, it would be lovely if everyone could go peat free and plastic free, but I think maybe you're looking to go beyond that.
Yeah, I did actually. So one of the things I wrote in my business plan that I've not implemented, which you've reminded me, is I wrote into the business plan that we'd have a surcharge on every pot like you have on a carrier bag in a supermarket. And we've not got around to doing that, but that is going to happen either this season when we open again on the 1st of April or into next season. But it makes people more aware. So people can bring, if they bought plants here in pots, they can bring the pots back. The original business plan said 20p pot. So if it's a 9 centimetre or a 1 litre or a 2 litre, that's fine. Or people could bring their own pots in, and we could exchange the plants into their pots, or wrap in newspaper. I wrote it loosely in that there'd be a surcharge that would cover me being more sustainable going forward and trying to find an alternative, which would be great to grow. Like, I'd love to get to a point where we sell bare root. Well, we're starting to sell things bare root now. I've got an enemy list that I release in the summer, in July, when we lift and divide. I've got a big collection of woodland anemones, Nemorosa types, and mainly Ranunculoides types. And they're great because they break the rules a little bit, because most bare root, as we know, is in the dormant season from November to March. But the woodland anemones, they do their growing in late winter, and obviously they flower late winter, early spring, and then they disappear in the summer. So we actually lift and divide the anemones in July, August, which is when we do relatively little propagation compared to like this time of year. So they're a really good nurseryman's plant. So I release a bare root list of that. So that's like a little dip into the water. And then it's like learning things about plants. Take Astrantias, for instance. Astrantias, we give them that cut back 2 or 3 times a year to get that next flush. Their most growth is in the middle of summer. And that's when they can split and divide them and replant them when you're doing the cutback. That's when they're doing all the growing. So why not change the rules a bit and offer Astrantias in July, August? It just relies on people planting them straight away and making sure they're well watered in. Obviously, there's lots of factors that affect this, like we get crazy hot summers. But 2 years ago, last year we had a really hot summer. The year before, we had quite a wet July, August, which, if you get a wet July, August, it's perfect for planting. So we have to be really adaptable on when we're doing plants and splitting, dividing. So I'm trying to work out the way that I grow things, which are all different things, is rather than just being really specific and saying, right, the bare root list is available in February, March. I can say, well, this is what I'm lifting and dividing now because of these weather conditions, and build the mailing list where I'll say, right, do you want these plants? So there's lots of moving parts, and it's just been really trying to be really flexible and doing it differently. That's through trial and failure and relearning. So yeah, that's where we're going really.
Yeah, I think when you're a smaller business, you have that flexibility to pivot when you need to, and you can mix things up. And that, I think, is the beauty of a smaller nursery. Do you think we need more smaller nurseries in this country?
Oh, massively, yeah. We're a dying need, and I'd love there to be a number of nurseries open up around me, and there could be a real community. There's Dean at Hooton's in South Yorkshire. There's Dixter trained. He's doing a great job. He's taking on a walled garden. And there's Henrietta Huntley up in Thirsk, it's mail order, Freckles and Flora. They're both really good growers and sort of strengthening the north. But I mean, I think we need to go back to having small nurseries in every area. I'm often chatting to designers and gardeners, and the great nursery that was up in this part of the world was Dove Cottage, really great perennial nursery that closed at the end of last season. And growers like that were really producing the best plants in the conditions for their area, they're starting to disappear. So I'd like to see lots of small nurseries pop up, and with small nurseries as well, you get a different variety of plants. People grow plants that they love when they're in a small nursery like I am, and that's why I look for my inspiration. Places like Wild Goose, Jack and Laura, Plantsman's Preference, Great Dixon Nursery, Beth Chatto's, all those sort of ones that are around. And Abby and Tom's up in the Lake District, they've been a big inspiration. So it's kind of piecing together this sort of map of little nurseries around the country, and they're often a good indicator of the best new plants or the best stalwarts that have been around for a long time, rather than going to the garden centre and, there's a new Salvia Nemeros that's been bred that's like a pink form of Caradon or something that's weak and micropropped and is not going to be long lived in the garden. I think really good garden doers, not just unusual plants, but ones that are also really, really good. So yeah, that's where I'll my inspiration off. So I think in answer to your question, yes, I think really lots more new nurseries, little nurseries.
And also, does it allow you to adapt the plants that you grow to the local conditions? And again, as you mentioned earlier, does it help you when you're working hand in glove with people like local planting designers, garden designers, those kind of people?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, I really love drought-tolerant planting and a new way of sort of gravel gardening and planting into different growing mediums, concrete and that sort of thing. But the reality is, I mean, I live near Harrogate and we're on really, really heavy clay. And not everybody wants a fancy new gravel garden that's got sand on it. So actually growing plants that are really specific to my area, I've got a collection of plants that I know are going to do well in Harrogate heavy clay. It's becoming really tricky, as I think, for designers and growers to grow when we've got these such changeable seasons. When you've got, we're just coming off the back of buckets and buckets of rain, and no doubt we're going to get a period of drought. And you got heavy clay, the ground cracks, and if the ground's not been maintained and mulched properly, and you get these big fissures that appear, it's really tricky. So I think it's down to growers to really help gardeners choose the right plants for their garden. And I suppose that's where I see my role locally, is trying to help people make the correct decisions rather than just coming in and thinking, oh yeah, I like that. Where can I plant it? Like, these are the plants that are going to work. Then can we make a planting plant that's going to work for your garden?
So doing the planting plans also adds another string to your bow as a business. Do you think that's essential for smaller growers?
I do. I think all small growers have got to have other strings to the bow. I mean, some places have workshops and teach propagation and things. Other people do mail order. People offer actual design. And I think it's very difficult to have a small specialist nursery that just relies on people coming through the door. And it's funny because sometimes there'll be somebody who'll come in and they'll buy a plant and you'll spend half an hour chatting to them. And then somebody else will come in and buy 50 plants and you spend half an hour chatting to them. So sometimes your time's weighed up differently. And that is one of the pressures of having a small nursery, small retail nursery. It's days when you're open, you get very little done because you're chatting to the public and you're chatting about their gardens. They want to tell you what sort of situation they've got and can you recommend this sort of plant. And the planting design side is a really good string to my business, and I found I really enjoy it. I tend to try and work with people with lists rather than set plans. I'll have a consultation with them. I'll work out what sort of style they're looking for. I am a perennial and grass nursery, so I largely like to design my perennials and grasses. And I will do like a long list and then get the client to select out the plants that they don't like the look of, and I'll put a hyperlink to Google Images so that they know what it looks like. And then get them to remove everything they don't like and then build a planting list from that. And if they really want a planting plan, that's great. Often, if they're not planting it themselves, it kind of like, it's sometimes a bit, having a small border, doing a planting plan where they're going to look at it once and then you go and plant it. I try and stay clients away from that, and they work to a set list, and then I give them a breakdown of how many plants there are and explain why they're in what position. It can be quite time consuming. I'm not amazing on CAD or on any of the Google Sketchman things. I mean, I can use them, but it takes me forever. So I either work on paper or I'll work to a planting list and go out and lay the plants out. And some clients will plant it themselves. Me and the dean on the nursery will go out and do the planting as well. So yeah, that's been a really good little side to the business that I wasn't expecting when I first started.
I'm going to take you back to what you were saying about growing in sand, because I know for some people that is still, the concept of it is still quite mind-blowing. But obviously it works for you if you're selling bare root. Can you just explain a bit about the process of how that happens in the nursery, and then when people take them home, do they just plonk them in the garden and away they go?
Yeah, and it's still really early days for me with the salmon planting. I went over and spent some time at Peter Con's, obviously the salmon guru, and we saw him talk about planting Buzzum at Sheffield. And it's a thing, I think some people get their head, they think you can't grow plants in sand, it's not going to work. But for me, I want to use it slightly differently to having pure sand gardens. There's things that we know grow really, really well in sand. Take, for instance, like the echinaceas, with the taprooted echinaceas, the pallida types. They hold really well in sand beds. And actually taking a plant from a pot and stripping all the soil off it, being quite invasive on the roots, it's not necessarily the way to go. I think if you can grow up rather than, I suppose it's a bit like bonsai, like growing up is the right way rather than growing down. It's starting plants off in that sort of quite stressed environment where there's lower nutrients and plants grow harder. They grow slower. They put out a bigger root system. There's less top growth. And then once they're established, you get these really long-lived plants. And actually, you find some of the more drought-tolerant species that we try and put into richer soils, they do better when they're grown in that way, which is probably more similar to how they grow in the wild. So basically, I mean, I'm looking out the window now at some sand beds that I've got in the front garden. They're 25 centimeters deep. It's river sand over, so the grit sand that you can get from the builders merchants, and it's got Mypex underneath it. But they will draw moisture up from underneath and nutrients up from underneath. I try and put plants in as small as I can and let them establish. And I'm really trialing what's working and what's not. Things like this winter, we've had buckets and buckets of rain. And one of the things that's not done well is the Echinacea purpurea type. So I've got some Echinacea purpurea magnus, which is they're different in the way that their root system forms the pallida types. So they're more fibrous than taprooted. And there's been quite a few that have rotted off in the wet weather. And then next to them, there's some Linum narbonense, which is a lovely little drought-tolerant flax. And they're amazing plants, and they lift them out, and they've got these amazing root systems on now, and they will be able to be sold to eventually, we don't sell online yet, but eventually online, but in the nursery, people will be able to say, all right, can I have this and this? It does rely, though, on them being planted, within quite a short period of time. I think we often suffer from the pot, I call it the pot graveyard gardeners, where people come into the nursery and buy a plant in full flower that looks really good. But we all buy with our eyes. I mean, I still do it myself. We'll often get home, we don't really know where that plant's going to go in the ground. And if we do, sometimes it will go with the other pots that we bought the week before. Or another lovely plant that we've seen not get planted. And then you get these pot-bound plants that don't get planted when they should do, don't necessarily get in the right place. So having a bare root plant means you've got to take it home and you've got to plant it. And you get a much better establishment. You don't get that little microclimate that's created in a pot. I think often when you buy perennials or shrubs or grasses, if you've got a very pot-bound plant, when you transfer that into the garden, they're in that really tight, very alien substrate. They can be grown, whether they're grown in peat-free compost or peat compost, doesn't matter. It's very different to your garden soil, and they'll stay in that little microclimate and not break out into the soil around them. But when you've got a plant that's bare root, and especially with the sand when there's no other soil on it, you put them in and they establish really well. They flourish and they transplant really well from the sand into soil, which there's often a bit of miscommunication about that. When you're going the other way, when you're going from soil into sand, it's quite difficult because they've been already grown in quite a nutrient-rich environment, and then you put them into quite a stressful situation. So I think there's more research needs to be done, and I'm sort of working it out the best I can, learning from failures, like I was saying, like with that Echinacea purpurea diet, trialing different things, seeing how they transplant, and being really honest with my findings and saying, actually, this didn't work, this did work, and really learn, fail, and try and help the other growers grow in that way.
So when you are planting bare root that's grown in sand into something like heavy clay, is the plant still happy?
That depends on the plant selection. So you don't have to just grow drought-tolerant plants in the sand. I mean, Amsonias do quite well in our heavy clay in Harrogate. And they also grow really well in the sand beds. I've got some that have got really good crown development as well as root development that are going to transplant, and they transplant really well. So you can't transplant drought-tolerant plants that don't usually grow into, say, clay soil anyway. It's still about right plant, right place, even though that it's been grown in a slightly different medium, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, going to Peter Corn's was mind-blowing, really. He's got beds of, take something that we all grow, Calamagros's Cal Foster, rows and rows of it in 20 centimetres of sand. And they're lifted and they can be transplanted into quite heavy soil. They romp away and they do really well. So we've still got to rely on knowledge that we've already learned about what grows well in what conditions when we're transplanting it.
Yeah, I haven't actually purchased plants grown in sand, to be honest with you. Not for any reason other than I think probably availability, but it's definitely something that I'd like to kind of consider more. I mean, is there an upper limit to the size that you can grow a plant up to in a sand bed? Is it better smaller specimens?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's early days. The plants that I'm growing are small to medium-sized plants, so they're probably the equivalent to a 9 centimetre or a 1 litre sized plant. I would err on the side of caution using bigger plants just because when you're transplanting a bigger plant and transplant it into the garden, it's always better to plant smaller and let them establish properly and grow from a small plant into a big plant in the ground. I've got a lovely little Dianthus pontidae, which is a smaller species in Carthusiorum, and they get really fibrousy roots. If you ever see them in a pot situation, they get like a film on the edge of the root system. It almost looks like a felt. Obviously, you don't get that when you go in the sand, so they lift, and when you plant them, you don't have to break into that root system. Imagine if you take a plant out of a pot and you're always taught to tease the plant so that you sort of free the roots a little bit. But you're effectively, when you do that, you're breaking roots and you're destroying roots. When you pull them out of the sand, you're breaking very, very few roots. I often take the top growth off as well. So the sand bare root season is extended because you can lift for a lot longer. You don't just have to lift in the off season and sort of finish in March. You can be lifting all year round, really. And taking the foliage off the top so you don't get that transpiration when they're transplanted, but they establish really quick and then you get that regrowth.
You said obviously we buy with our eyes, which is so true. I'm very guilty of that. As a retail nursery, how do you find customers respond to plants when they see them?
So the model here is that I'm creating beds and small gardens around the nursery that I've got the plants growing in that are at maturity. So we've got sort of like show beds that we're working on all the time. Some of them are very narrow and show the plants off. And this is not all just instead. We've got sand beds and we've got the clay beds that we've got around here. And I learned this at Yorkgate. When we put the new nursery in there, there's a small entrance garden that goes sort of into the garden, and you go past the nursery as you come in. And it's 2.5, 3 meters deep and 7, 8 meters long. So it's not a big space. And we could have literally had a nursery from just them beds. People see it in full flower in the ground and they want to buy it. And actually, we've found here that people are really willing to buy a little plant. That inspiration that we get when we go to the garden centre or the nursery and we see a plant in a 2 litre or a 3 litre pot in full flower, people have got that same psychological wish if they see it in the ground. And it's been really, really good. And even in pot displays, we have terracotta pot displays in the nursery. Something like last year, Delise aquamarine, which is a Salvia Delise aquamarine, which is a macrophylla type, really lovely blue flower, and we had it in a large terracotta pot. We could have sold 1,000 of them because people see it doing its thing in all its glory, and they say, "I want to buy with them." And we'll say, "We've only got small 9 centimetre plants left," and they say, "That's absolutely fine. Happy to wait and see it grow." So it's been really interesting getting into the psychology of how people buy. It's kind of playing on that buy with your eyes, but the buy with your eyes is in the ground, and then you can go and buy a really small plant in the nursery that's going to establish well the following year. So that's hopefully in my mind how I want it to work.
Yeah, I think that's such a good idea. There are a few nurseries around my neck of the woods that have like little show garden things on a mini scale, and they are so good, just to see the plants in situ and to see them growing. So yeah, fantastic idea. I was going to ask you as well about sort of smaller nurseries and that tendency that a lot of people have to push and continually expand, continually look for ways to bring in more and more revenue, to expand their stock. Do you think that there is a limit really that you're happy to kind of work towards, or do you think the sky's the limit, just go for it?
To be honest, I have changing views on that. I remember before I started, I was chatting to Rosie Hardy, and one of the things she said to me was, decide how big you want to get before you start, which I thought was great advice. Not that I've decided, but I think the sky is the limit with nurseries. Because there is so few small nurseries, I think there is the potential to just get bigger and bigger and bigger which means more infrastructure, more staff, more costs, more outlay. I'd really like to max out at sort of 3 full-time members of staff. I've got 1 full-time member of staff, Nadine, at the minute, who's amazing. And we've got a trainee hopefully starting in September, which I'll come on to in a second. But yeah, I think moving to a model where we have a maximum of 3 members of staff and the turnover and profit reflects that small team, then that's where I'd be happy. I mean, I'm not here to try and make millions. I love doing what I'm doing, and I want to create a comfortable lifestyle where I grow the plants that I love and the nursery don't get too out of hand. I want to stay as a small nursery.
I just asked that out of, personal interest. I thought a lot of people, I think, are driven to keep on going, but actually, particularly the smaller nurseries and the local growers, the beauty of them is the fact that they are fairly niche, actually. It's like your USP. But you were going to tell me about your trainee.
Yeah, so Katie Merrington at the Hepworth, who's a good friend, we were chatting a couple of years ago and thought it'd be really good if we could have a hybrid traineeship in a garden and in a nursery and getting college training as well. And anyway, we've got the funding through the Julia Rouse Foundation. And yeah, so it's basically the traineeship's going to be 2 days at the Hepworth with Katie. It's going to be 2 days on the nursery with me. And then there's going to be a day doing equivalent qualification at college. So RHS level 2 or 3, depending on experience. It's going to be a really amazing experience. We're both in really good locations because we're both on train lines and bus routes. So it makes it accessible to pretty much everybody. So you don't have to drive to be able to do it. And we're writing the program at the minute for the content, but effectively it's going to be propagation, sales, nurserymanship here in the garden with Katie, learning how to look after a garden and a garden in the public space, and then learning the fundamentals at college. So yeah, we're really quite excited about that. It's not been fully launched yet. It's been then posted on the Hepworth website because they're building a new garden building there for workshops and the volunteers and the trainee. So yeah, that's really exciting times, and we'll be getting it out to the world soon.
That sounds fantastic. I love the sound of that. I love that you've created a bespoke course. And a shout out to the Julia Rouse Trust, because they also support the charity that I work for. So they're doing fantastic work in the field of horticulture by the sounds of it. I'm going to finish with a question which is going to make, hopefully, plant people salivate, which is, are you growing anything new this year that you're really excited about that's going to be your new Salvia Delis Aquiline?
Well, yeah, there's a few plants that I already grow that I absolutely love. And then there's a few things that I'm trying for the first time. So, I mean, I always bang on, I've been a cross Baileyana Purple Haze, which was a plant that was bred a few years ago by Malcolm Allinson. It's a hybrid between a starter and Verbena Bampton, which is that lovely little officinalis type that's dark-leaved, found in a Cornish village, and they named it Wisley after the village. But it's a really good plant, and having a starter as a parent, it can handle slightly damper conditions than, say, like your Bonariensis type. And it is a stunning plant. It gets to about 5 foot. That lovely dark foliage, like Bampton, and that upright form for starter. It does its thing for so much longer than some of the other verbenas because of the dark foliage. And then we selected a white form of Dahlia Merkii on the nursery a few years ago. In fact, Henrietta from Freckles and Flora was working out at the time, and she spotted the seedling. We had about 200 grown from seed. And it's traditionally a really weak plant. I know Derry's grown it before, and Alan Gray, East Ruston, but they've always traditionally been quite weak plants. They don't grow very well. Anyway, this seedling is super vigorous. It can't be done from seed, it has to be done from basil cuttings, and I'm offering it for the first time this year. It's just a really amazing, dainty species dahlia. And then the new things that I'm trying is a species penstemon, which obviously we all know things like Raven and sour grapes and some of the sort of the older, more traditional cultivars, but there's some really like drought-tolerant species, Barbatus coccinea, Strictus, Etonii, which they're just germinating at the minute, and I'm looking forward to growing them and getting them in the sand planting and some of the gravelly areas that I've got and seeing how they perform. But they're much smaller flowered, like a lot of species plants, and they're the sort of thing that I'm excited about for this year. So we've got 6 or 7 different species that we're gonna give a go. So yeah, it's exciting, and that's why I do it really. I grow plants that I like the look of and see if I can sell it.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Ben. for such an open and insightful conversation about the realities of running a small, sustainable nursery. If today's episode has got you thinking about local growing, plant production and doing things differently, you might also enjoy episode 284, The Organic Nursery, and episode 175, Seeking Rare Plants. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thank you for listening. Next up is Benny with his Insect of the Week. But first, here's a word from our sponsors, The Roasting House.
There's nothing like a nice cup of coffee outside on a spring day. Hello from The Roasting House. We're a small, family-owned coffee roastery based in South Yorkshire. We love coffee, but we're also passionate about protecting nature and trying to keep our footprint as small as we can. At The Roasting House, we offer delicious coffees from around the world, carefully selected from farms that use nature-friendly methods such as shade growing, soil conservation, and maintaining wild areas for native wildlife. We roast in small batches using an energy-efficient roaster and filter the smoke to remove carbon to reduce air pollution. Roasting House coffee is packed in home compostable packaging, and we know that it actually breaks down because we've tested it in our own compost heap and worm farm. Order at roastinghouse.co.uk, and if you mention Roots and All or the Insect of the Week at checkout, we'll send you 25% extra free coffee as a thank you for supporting us.
The rosy woodlouse. Scientific name, Androniscus dentiger. Now, my insect of the week is not an insect. My insect of the week is not a bug. My insect of the week is a crustacean. So this is my crustacean of the week. And I guess I'm really pushing my luck in terms of taxonomy here. But I hope you'll forgive me, as the rosy woodlouse, I feel, is a very worthy creature of being featured on the podcast. And these are absolutely stunning. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but I will post a picture. These are one of the most incredible little creatures you'll find in gardens. And they have a very important role as well, which I'll tell you about in a moment. The etymology, the genus Androniscus, comes from the Greek andro, meaning man or warrior. I think I prefer warrior. And oniskos is woodlouse, or according to the internet, small donkey. Well, I've not heard that when I was spending my time in Greece working with sea turtles for some years. But if that is true, please correct me or somebody let me know. That could be interpreted as a small donkey warrior for the genus. And then dentiger, that comes from the Latin denti or dent for tooth, and ger for bearing, so tooth bearing. So quite a interesting bit of etymology. So a tooth bearing donkey warrior, small donkey warrior. So I think woodlice have got their fair share of names. Pillbugs, roly-polies. I think I've heard there's approaching between 50 and 100 regional names for them. So they're just incredible, aren't they? So they're not insects, as I mentioned. They're actually isopods. So they're terrestrial crustaceans. And they're closer to crabs and lobsters than they are to bees and ants, say. So I'm pushing my luck in terms of what I should be featuring on the podcast, but they play a very crucial role in gardens because they feed on dead plant matter. And so they're recycling nutrients, and they're performing a very important role, as well as them being extremely beautiful and interesting. The habitat that they can be found in is gardens, as I mentioned, which is very important, but also coastal areas, old quarries and caves. So cave dwellers as well, just to add to the list of cool features. And isopods, I read when I was doing a little bit of research, because I haven't really read into isopods for many years since my degree, and they can actually drink through their butts. And I thought this is a joke online, and it does seem to be true. So they are fascinating little creatures. And if you read into the further kind of isopod related morphological features or behavior, there's some very interesting stuff. I think we could do a whole episode on them. But the rosy woodlouse is one to watch out for. If you have seen one, please do tag me and please let me know. And anytime you see them, please record on the apps iNaturalist or iRecord.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.